The iron is cold against your wrist, not the comfortable cold of a fresh pillowcase or the pleasant cold of stone flags on a summer morning. This is the cold of a thing that has never once been warm, a thing cast in darkness for darkness that has not left it since the foundry floor. You've been here for 11 days, or 13. You've lost count. The light that falls through the single high window above you is unreliable. Some mornings it arrives grey and thin like watered milk. Some mornings it doesn't come at all. You've learned already that counting days at a place like this is its own variety of madness, and you're trying very hard not to go mad. That is the central problem of your existence right now in this room, in this year of 1763, in a private madhouse in Hoxton, 2 miles north of the city of London. You're not mad. You are in fact one of the sanest people you've ever met. You know your own name. You know the day your mother died. You know the price of bread, and the name of the king and the complete text of the Lord's Prayer in both English and Latin, because your father believed in education, God rest him. What you are specifically is inconvenient, and in the year 1763, inconvenient women and mad women are stored in exactly the same place. So, I make these history stories. I genuinely don't know if you fall asleep to them, or if you're just lying there increasingly horrified, and honestly both are valid responses when I'm talking about locked rooms and iron wrist cuffs and the legal machinery that could, in Georgian England, take a perfectly sensible woman and file her away like an unwanted letter. Subscribe if you want, get comfortable. Here we go. Picture a house on the edge of London. A real house, a handsome house even, with a garden wall and a painted sign above the gate that reads, Mrs. Dempsey's Establishment for Ladies of Nervous Disposition. The paint is fresh. The gate is iron, which is not unusual. The windows have bars, which you might chalk up to security in a dangerous city if you don't look too closely. From the outside it looks like a boarding house, a school perhaps, something respectable. Now go inside. Strip away the front parlour Mrs. Dempsey shows to families. The parlour with its decent furniture and the smell of beeswax and the framed engraving of Windsor Castle above the mantel. That room is theatre. That room is a stage set. Behind that room, through the door that is always kept locked when visitors come, through the corridor that smells not of beeswax but of something older and wetter and considerably worse, is where the real establishment lives. Go through that door, add the smell of 40 unwashed bodies, the smell of chamber pots emptied twice a week if you're lucky, the smell of straw that was laid fresh in October and has not been changed since, and it is now February, and things have happened to that straw. Add the smell of tallow candles burning cheap and black and smoky. Add, underneath all of it, something you cannot quite name. A smell that is partly damp stone and partly fear, and partly the specific variety of hopelessness that gathers in places where people have been suffering for a long time, with no expectation of it stopping. That's Mrs. Dempsey's establishment. There are 16 women here. You're one of them. Your name is Margaret Ashworth. You're 27 years old. You were born in Bristol, the daughter of a cloth merchant who educated you beyond what anyone considered necessary, and died of a lung fever when you were 19, leaving you a modest inheritance and a head full of ideas that would, your aunt told you even then, cause trouble. Your aunt was not wrong. You married Thomas Ashworth at 22. He was 34. He had a house in Cheapside and a partnership in a counting firm and steady income, and he seemed, at the time, like a reasonable man. He is a reasonable man, actually. That is the most infuriating thing about all of this. He did not commit you to Mrs. Dempsey's because he hates you. He did not do it in a rage or out of cruelty or for sport. He did it because you became, as he explained to Dr. Fenwick in the parlour of your own house on the 14th of November last year, disordered in your thinking and a danger to the proper running of the household. What had you done? Specifically, you had refused to give up correspondence with a bookseller on Fleet Street who sold you, among other things, essays by women writers your husband considered unsuitable. You had argued twice and then a third time about the management of the small inheritance your father had left you, which by law now belonged entirely to Thomas, but which you considered in some stubborn corner of your heart to still be yours. You had wept for 3 weeks after the death of your second child, who arrived early and did not stay, and you had not recovered the way Thomas and his mother felt you should have done, not in the 6 weeks they deemed appropriate, not in the 8 weeks after that. And in October, you had told Thomas quite calmly that you did not love him, not with heat, not with screaming or throwing things. You had simply stated it as a fact, the way you might state that the weather had turned cold or that the candles needed replacing. You had said, "I do not think I love you, Thomas, and I am not certain I ever did. I think we should discuss what is to be done." He had looked at you for a long moment. Then he had left the room. 2 weeks later, Dr. Fenick arrived with the document already written out. You remember the exact texture of the parlour rug under your feet when they told you. You'd been sitting in your usual chair by the window reading. It was the kind of afternoon that exists only in November, the light going early, the fire struggling, the whole city feeling as though it's pulling itself inward like a fist. Dr. Fennick had a leather case. He set it on the table as if it were something ordinary. He explained, in a voice of practised sympathy, that your melancholia had reached a stage where professional supervision was required, that there was an excellent establishment in Hoxton, that the air was good there, and the other residents were ladies of quality, and you would be comfortable. Thomas had stood by the mantelpiece the whole time. He had not looked at you once. You had argued. You had argued very clearly and logically, which was, as Dr. Fenwick later wrote in his admission notes, further evidence of the patient's disordered state, manifesting as unusual obstinacy and an unfeminine refusal to accept the judgment of those better positioned to assess her condition. Arguing, you see, was proof of madness. Silence would have been proof of madness too. There was no thing you could have said in that parlour that would not have been written down as evidence. You understood that about 40 seconds in, and the understanding arrived like a hand closing around your throat. They put you in a hackney carriage. One of Mrs. Dempsey's attendants rode with you. Her name was Bess, and she was not unkind, and she spent the entire journey staring out the window and picking at a loose thread on her glove, and she did not meet your eyes once, because some jobs are easier if you don't look too directly at the person. Mrs. Dempsey's gate swung open, and here you are. Let me tell you what a private madhouse actually is, because the name makes it sound more medical than it is. A private madhouse in 1763 is, in its most essential form, a business. Someone, usually a man with a medical qualification of some kind, or a woman with money enough to hire one, obtains a license from the local magistrate. The license allows them to receive lunatics for payment. The payment comes from families. The families pay anything from 5 shillings a week for the pauper wards. If there are pauper wards, not all establishments take charity cases, up to several pounds a week for private rooms with decent food and perhaps a garden. Thomas pays Mrs. Dempsey 30 shillings a week for you. For 30 shillings a week you receive a private room, which is to say a room you share with only one other woman, a bed, a wool blanket, which is thin, 2 meals daily, which are small, the services of Dr. Fenick, who visits once a fortnight and spends approximately 8 minutes with each patient, and the assurance offered in writing to Thomas that you will be kept safe and that treatment will be administered as required. Treatment is a word that covers a great deal of territory. There are, in 1763, roughly as many theories of madness as there are doctors willing to theorize. Some believe it is a disorder of the blood requiring bleeding. Some believe it is caused by the womb in women, because there is almost nothing that cannot be blamed on the womb in 1763. Some believe cold baths shock the nerves back into alignment. Some believe warm baths do the same thing. Some believe rotation, strapping a patient to a chair and spinning them, clarifies the mind. Some believe isolation heals. Some believe company heals. Almost none of them have spent meaningful time listening to their patients. Dr. Fenick favours bleeding and cold water. You have been bled once so far from the arm, while Bess held your wrist. Dr. Fenick had taken 4 ounces and written something in his notebook, and said good in the tone of a man discussing a well-rising loaf, and left. You'd felt afterward neither more nor less mad than before, just lighter and cold and very tired, and your arm had hurt for 3 days. Your room is roughly 12 feet by 10. You've measured it by pacing barefoot on the cold stone floor. 12 feet from the door to the wall, 10 feet from the window wall to the chamber pot corner, which is what you call the corner nearest the door because the chamber pot lives there, and the smell is accordingly concentrated in that general area. The window is high, set near the ceiling, maybe 8 feet up, because that is how madhouse windows are designed. You can see sky through it, a rectangle of sky, about 2 feet by 18 inches, which shows you cloud most days and rain some days and occasionally, rarely, heartbreakingly actual blue. There are bars on the window. Iron, the same cold iron as your wrist cuff. The cuff, you should know, is not always there. You wear it only at night now. Dr. Fenick made a note on your second visit that the patient appears docile and poses no immediate physical risk, and instructed Mrs. Dempsey to reduce restraint during waking hours. During the day you move freely within the room, and on days when Mrs. Dempsey is in a generous mood, which is not often but is also not never, you're permitted to walk in the garden for 30 minutes. The garden is walled. The wall is 8 feet high, topped with broken glass set in mortar. You know this because you examined it carefully the first time they let you out, and the attendant, a young man named Jack, had watched you do it with an expression of flat resignation that suggested every patient did exactly this on their first garden visit. You haven't stopped thinking about that wall. Your roommate is a woman named Eleanor Voss. She's 43 years old, and she's from Derbyshire, and she's been here for 2 years. Eleanor is one of the women who troubles you in your more honest moments, because Eleanor, you sometimes think, may actually be unwell. She has conversations with people who are not in the room. She weeps for hours without apparent cause, and then stops abruptly, as if a tap has been turned, and resumes whatever she was doing before with complete composure. She sleeps badly. She wakes shrieking sometimes, though she cannot always tell you what she was dreaming about. But then you think, lying awake at 2 in the morning listening to the sounds of the house, other women crying, the footsteps of the night attendant, the mice in the walls, always the mice in the walls, you think about Eleanor and you wonder. 2 years of this. 2 years of cold rooms and thin meals and bleeding and cold baths and no letters from anyone, and no visitors except once. A brother who came and sat with her for 20 minutes and then left looking stricken and did not come back. You wonder what Eleanor was like before she came here. You wonder whether 2 years from now someone will look at you the way you look at Eleanor. That thought is the one you have to put away. You put it away like a letter you haven't read, tucked under the thin mattress of your mind. You don't read it. You don't look at it. Because if you look at it too directly and for too long, something in you will start to crack, and you need, more than you need anything else in this world to stay intact. The straw beneath the mattress crinkles when you shift your weight. It's a sound you've come to know intimately, the way you know the sound of rain on the window glass and the sound of the key in the lock. 3 distinct sounds, actually, because the door has 2 locks and a bolt, and they fall in sequence like a small song. And the sound of Eleanor talking to the wall at night, which is a low murmur, almost soothing once you've adjusted to it. You know the feeling of the wool blanket, too. It's rough. Not rough the way good, honest, rough wool is rough. The kind of rough that means the sheep was real, and the spinner was working fast, and the cloth has life in it. This is the rough of something that's been washed badly and dried badly too many times. The fibres stiffened into something almost like wire. It catches on the dry skin of your hands. Your hands have become very dry. The cold and the lack of any proper soap and the work they sometimes give you, more on that later, have turned your hands into something almost unrecognisable. The knuckles crack. There's always one that bleeds slightly, the middle knuckle of your right hand, which hasn't properly healed in 2 weeks. You press your thumb against it now, lying in the dark, feeling the slight raised edge of the scab. You're still here. You're still a body with a bleeding knuckle and dry hands and cold feet. That is, tonight, enough. There are 16 women in Mrs. Dempsey's establishment. You've met most of them. The 16 are divided across 8 rooms. Though divided is perhaps too orderly a word, the distribution is irregular, the way most things are in places that were not designed for their purpose. Mrs. Dempsey's house was once a private residence. The large downstairs rooms have been divided by thin partition walls. You can hear everything through the partitions. The sound of crying passes through them like smoke. You know the women by their voices before you know their faces. The woman in the room to your left cries every evening at the same time, just after the supper trays are collected, not sobbing, but a steady, quiet weeping that goes on for perhaps half an hour and then stops. You don't know her name yet. The women here don't always tell you their names, because some of them have stopped trusting. You've started calling her Clockwork privately in your head because of the punctual regularity of her grief. And then you felt terrible about it, and then you forgave yourself because you need something to think about or you'll go mad. You're determined not to go mad. The woman in the room to your right is named Patience. She is 19 years old. She was committed, you've learned from the attendant Bess in a moment of unusual candour, because her father decided she was infatuated beyond reason with a young man he did not approve of, and this infatuation manifested in what Bess called fits of passion, weeping, refusing to eat, writing letters. Patience, when you first met her, told you all of this with remarkable clarity and even a degree of dark humour, laughing slightly at the word infatuated as if she found it both accurate and ridiculous at once. Patience is from a good family. Her clothes, even after however long she's been here, 3 months she says, still show the quality of the original fabric, the dull mourning of good wool going unwashed. She has a way of sitting with her back very straight that she probably absorbed from years of someone telling her to sit straight, and she does it even in the garden, even in the cold, even when there is nothing and no one to perform correctness for. You like patience. You're worried about patience. The worry is not abstract. It has a texture. It lives in the observation that Patience no longer mentions the young man by name. She did at first. At first, his name came out every other sentence. James this and James that. Until you could practically see him standing in the corner of the room. Now she doesn't say it. Now when the topic comes near, she redirects. The way you redirect yourself past that letter you won't read. She redirects toward something bland and safe, and she smiles slightly and she changes the subject. You recognize what you're seeing. It's what happens when a person starts to believe what they've been told. They're doing this to her on purpose, you think. The same way they're trying to do it to you. Then you stop thinking that. Because thinking that too loudly, even in the privacy of your own skull, feels dangerous. There is a woman here named Agnes who came, Bess told you, from a house in Suffolk, and who is 61 years old, and who is here because her son believed she was squandering his inheritance. Agnes's madness consists, as far as you can determine, of a cheerful willingness to give money to causes her son did not approve of, a charity school, an almshouse, a young woman she took under her protection, for reasons that were probably nothing more than kindness, but which her son characterized as eccentricity bordering on lunacy. Agnes has been here for 4 years. Agnes is the most sane person in the building. Agnes has made a kind of peace with Mrs. Dempsey's that you find simultaneously admirable and devastating. She's arranged her half of the room she shares with the nearly catatonic woman named Ruth, as if it were a respectable bedroom. She has a small Bible she was permitted to keep. She has 2 letters she received 18 months ago, which she folds and unfolds with such regularity that they are beginning to fall apart along the creases. She gives you advice in the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing a route through a city she has memorized. Don't argue with Bess, Agnes said on your 3rd day. Not because she's cruel, she isn't mostly, but because she writes notes, and the notes go to Mrs. Dempsey, and Mrs. Dempsey reports to Dr. Fenwick, and Dr. Fenwick writes in his book that you are contrary, and contrary is a diagnosis here. Everything is a diagnosis here, you said. Agnes had looked at you with something between amusement and pity. Yes, that's the trick of it. There is also Mary. Mary is different from the others. Mary arrived 3 weeks before you. She's been here longer. She knows the rhythms of the place better. She knows which floorboards creak and which guard sleeps after midnight, and what words exactly will make Mrs. Dempsey's face go careful and controlled in the way of a woman who wants to preserve her license, and therefore will not do the thing she wants to do. Mary was a milliner's apprentice before she came here. She's 24, the same rough age as you, give or take 3 years, and she's here because she suffered what her employer called a derangement of the mind following the death of her infant, a daughter who lived 6 weeks and then did not. Mary does not speak about the baby. Mary speaks about other things with extraordinary sharpness. She has catalogued the entire establishment with the precision of someone who has decided that knowledge is the only currency available to her. She knows the schedule of Dr. Fenick's visits down to the approximate hour. She knows which attendant can be persuaded with what. She knows that Mrs. Dempsey's licence comes up for renewal with the magistrate in April, which means that February and March are the months when the establishment looks its best and the treatments are slightly less aggressive, because bad outcomes during inspection season are bad for business. Mary also knows that there is a loose bar on the third window from the left in the back corridor. She told you this on the 5th day, very quietly, while you were both sitting in the garden. She said it the way you might mention that the soup at dinner had been slightly better than usual. She did not look at you while she said it. "Just so you know," she said, "you had looked at the wall, at the glass on top, at the distance between the ground and the top, at the distance between the house and the wall. You hadn't said anything." Mary had nodded slightly as if you had. The day at Mrs. Dempsey's runs on a fixed track, and it runs the same track whether it is Monday or Thursday, whether it is raining or fine, whether you slept or did not sleep, whether you feel capable of facing it or not. 5 o'clock in the morning, Bess comes with the chamber pots. This is your introduction to the day, which tells you something about the shape of things here. The smell is always the same and always worse than you expected, even after 11 days of expecting it. 6 o'clock, breakfast. The tray arrives and is set just inside the door. Cold porridge, a cup of small beer, a piece of bread that is never quite fresh. In winter, the porridge is genuinely cold by the time it reaches your room, having travelled from the kitchen through corridors that have no heating. You eat it. You eat all of it every morning because you learned early that the alternative is hunger that lasts all the way to the afternoon tray, and hunger makes thinking difficult, and thinking is what you have in here. It is almost all you have. You will not let hunger take it from you. The bread is coarse. It drags across your gums. You eat it in small pieces, slowly, the way you've started doing everything. Slowly, carefully, attending to each sensation as if your body is something you are learning to read. You feel the cold of the cup against your palm. The small beer is thin and slightly sour and tastes of nothing much, and you drink it all because it is liquid and liquid matters. You think, I am eating breakfast. I am 27 years old and I am eating breakfast. I remember breakfast at home, the good coffee, the white bread, the small pot of marmalade on the sideboard. I remember the sound of the coffee being poured. I remember the window with the light in it. I am not there. I am here. I am still eating breakfast. This is, you have discovered, a form of resistance, not a dramatic one. Not the kind that gets written into ballads or spoken about in coffee houses, but it is yours. After breakfast, there is work. Not hard labour. This is not officially a workhouse. But Mrs. Dempsey is practical about her economies. Several of the women, those deemed stable enough for industry, as Mrs. Dempsey puts it, are given tasks. The tasks are simple. Sewing, mending, picking apart old rope for oakum, which is then sold, carding wool. You've been assigned sewing. Specifically, you mend linens, household linens, sheets and pillowcases and table napkins, presumably from Mrs. Dempsey's own household, or from houses she has some arrangement with. You're given a pile of linen each morning and a needle and thread, and you work at the small table in your room, and the work is collected each evening. The needle is blunt. You have asked twice for a better needle, and been told that needles are kept blunt as a precaution, which is a policy you understand and also despise. The thread is rough cotton. It doesn't pass through the linen smoothly. You have to push, feel the slight give as the needle forces through the weave. Your fingers have learned the pressure of it. Your fingertips are calloused now in the way that seamstresses are, little raised ridges on the pads, which is information your body is storing without your permission. The sewing is also, in its way, a form of resistance. You do it very well. You were taught to sew properly by a woman who believed in doing things properly, and the seams you make are neat and even, and the mended sections are nearly invisible. You've started to think of each mended linen as a small proof. I did this. I was here. I was able. Nobody looks at the linens closely enough to notice, but you notice. There is an hour in the afternoon, weather permitting, which means approximately half the days in February, when you may go into the garden. The garden in February is mostly mud, which has frozen into ridges and then half thawed into something darker and more yielding than it should be. A mud that grabs at your shoes and doesn't quite let go. The air out here is cold and sharp and has the quality of air that hasn't had buildings around it for a while, and you breathe it in like something precious because inside the house the air is always wrong. Inside the house the air smells of the wrong things. Out here it smells of cold and mud and the smoke from a neighbour's chimney somewhere beyond the wall, and something that might be the Thames on a southerly wind, though you're too far north for that to be quite possible. Maybe it's the New River. You used to walk along the New River with your friend Charlotte, back before everything, back in the world. You don't think about Charlotte for too long. It's the same reason you don't think about the unread letter under the mental mattress. Some thoughts have too much weight to carry standing up. In the garden, you walk. You do exactly 30 minutes of walking back and forth across the narrow strip of frozen mud between the house wall and the garden wall. You count your steps. You've established that 22 steps takes you from the house to the wall, and 22 steps brings you back. So one length is 22 steps, and 30 minutes is approximately 140 lengths, and 140 lengths is 3,080 steps. And you do this math not because it matters, but because doing the math means your brain is working, and your brain working means you are not yet what they want you to be. The wall is on your left as you turn at the far end. You don't look at it directly. You do, every day, as you pass the third window from the left in the back corridor, as you enter the garden, and again as you leave it. Let your eyes slide sideways just slightly, just long enough to see the window, the bar that is loose, the gap it would make if it were removed. You don't stop. You don't touch it. You just note it. You store it. Dr. Fenick comes on Tuesdays. His carriage arrives at 10 in the morning, you know by. The sound of the wheels on the cobbles outside the gate. A distinctive sound because one of the horses has a shoe that strikes slightly unevenly. Clop, 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 like a waltz played badly. You've come to dread that sound the way you'd dread a dentist's knock or a bailiff's knock or the sound of any person arriving with power over your body that you cannot refuse. He comes first to Mrs. Dempsey's parlour, where you imagine he drinks the good tea. You're never offered the good tea, and reviews whatever she has written in her weekly notes about the residents. Then he progresses through the house room by room, 8 minutes per patient, sometimes less. You hear him coming down the corridor. His boots are hard-soled and strike the floor with authority. He does not try to walk quietly. There is no reason to try to walk quietly. He is the doctor. You are the patient. The asymmetry is built into the architecture of the place. When he opens your door, he does not knock. Mrs. Ashworth sits on the chair that has been placed for him. There is always a chair placed for him, and he opens the small leather notebook and he looks at you with the professional attention of a man examining a piece of machinery for faults. He is not a monster, Dr. Fenwick. That is one of the things that makes him difficult to think about. He's a man of about 50, well dressed without being extravagant, with close-cut grey hair and the hands of someone who has spent a great deal of time cutting things open and sewing them back together. He's a member of the Royal College of Physicians. He's written papers. He believes, apparently sincerely, that what he is doing is medicine. "How are you sleeping?" he asks. "Poorly," you tell him. He writes something down. "Are you eating?" "Yes." "Are you experiencing any disturbances of thought? Any impressions or visions not supported by external stimulus?" This is the question you are most careful about. "No," you say. He writes something, then he looks up, assessing. His eyes are not unkind exactly. They are simply evaluative in the way that a surveyor's eyes are evaluative, measuring rather than seeing. "Your husband visited last week," he says. Your breath stops for a moment. You had not known this. Thomas was here and you were not told. "Did he?" You keep your voice absolutely steady because anything unsteady goes into the notebook. He is concerned for your progress. He hopes you are applying yourself to recovery. A pause. "Are you applying yourself, Mrs. Ashworth? You understand what this means. Are you becoming more compliant? Are you submitting? Are you accepting the diagnosis?" "I am trying to improve," you say. It is not quite a lie. It is not the lie they want. But it is not an argument either. And anything that is not an argument is a step toward the door. You have worked this out like an equation. Cooperation, or the performance of cooperation, is the only currency that has any value here. Dr. Fenick writes, something, nods, stands. "We'll continue the weekly bleeding through March," he says, "and I'm recommending a course of cold baths twice weekly beginning this Thursday." Your stomach drops. You have not had the cold baths yet. You've heard them. In the mornings, sometimes, you can hear from down the corridor the sound of water, the slosh of it, the specific sound of a large quantity of cold water meeting something. And then other sounds. You've not wanted to think too carefully about what those other sounds are. "Yes, doctor," you say. He nods again and is gone. You sit for a moment with your hands flat on the table, feeling the wood under your palms, rough, unfinished, slightly sticky in a way that is probably old grease. You press your palms down hard, feel the resistance. Then you pick up the needle and you go back to mending the linen. Your hands are shaking slightly. You breathe through it until they stop. Bess comes that evening with the supper tray, boiled mutton, which is more mutton than usual, and a slightly larger piece of bread. And while she's setting it down, she says, without quite looking at you, "The baths aren't so terrible. Cold shock first minute, then you stop feeling it." She says it the way someone says the soup is better today. As information, not comfort. But information is what you've been running short on, and you take it. "How cold?" you ask. "Winter River cold," she says. "Not iced, just cold." She picks up the empty morning tray and goes to the door. "Bess," she pauses. "Did you see my husband when he visited? Did he ask after me?" Bess stands with her back to you for a moment and you watch her shoulders. The set of them. The slight adjustment that happens when a person is deciding what to say. "He asked Mrs. Dempsey about your progress," she says finally. "Not about you, about your progress." "Thank you," you say. The door closes. Both locks, and then the bolt. The small song in falling thirds. You eat the mutton, which is tough and slightly grey and tastes of boiling water and not much else. And you eat all of it, and you sit in the last light from the high window, which has gone the colour of old pewter, and you think about nothing for a while, which is its own form of rest. Thursday comes the way all days come here. which is to say suddenly without warning, even though you were expecting it. Bess comes for you at 7 in the morning before breakfast. She's accompanied by a larger attendant named John, who is young and embarrassed about his role here, in the way that young men sometimes are when their job requires them to participate in the undignified handling of women. He stands in the corridor and doesn't come in. "Dress simply," Bess says. "Just the shift. Leave your outer things." You do as she says. The morning air in the room is cold enough that your breath is visible, little clouds of it, and standing in only the shift, a rough linen thing not your own, something of Mrs. Dempsey's establishment is an education in just how cold a room can be. The bath is in a back room on the ground floor which you've never been in before. The room is small and has a stone floor and a drain in the floor, and there is a large wooden tub, and there is a pump. The pump is new, an iron thing, one of the hand pumps that pull water from the cistern. The cistern is fed by collected rainwater, and is not, in February, anywhere near warm. The water in the tub is clear. You know what is about to happen, and your body knows too. Knows it in a way that goes below rational thought, the way you know not to step off a ledge. Your heart is going fast. "Sit in the tub," Bess says. You look at her. You look at John, who's looking at the ceiling. Then you climb into the tub. The cold hits your feet first, a cold so sharp it registers as pain, not temperature, the way extreme cold sometimes does. It's the cold of stone in January, the cold of water that has been sitting in an iron cistern through a February night. You make a sound before you can stop yourself. Not a scream, a kind of compressed exhalation, like a punch absorbed. Bess pumps water. The pump handle squeaks on each downstroke, a rhythmic mechanical sound, and the water comes out in a rush and falls across your shoulders and your back, and it takes your breath away. Not metaphorically, literally. Your lungs clench, and the air goes out of them, and for a moment you cannot draw any back in, the cold having done something to the mechanism of breathing, seized it like a frost-jammed lock. Then your body remembers what it's for, and you breathe in, gasping, and the breath is cold too, cold all the way down. More water, another pump. It sluices down your back and you're shaking, your whole body shaking, not with fear, with cold, with the involuntary machinery of a body trying desperately to generate warmth it doesn't have the resources for. Your hands grip the sides of the tub. The wood is rough and slightly slimy under your fingers, and you grip it because it is the only solid thing. Bess counts to 60. You count with her, in your head, though you count faster than she does. You're at 60 before she's at 40. You start again. You go slowly. You make yourself count each second as a separate, complete thing. 1. This second is real and it is passing. 2. This second is real and it is passing. At 60, Bess says, "Up." You stand. The air is colder on your wet skin than the water had been, which seems cosmically unfair but is accurate. John produces a rough linen towel. It has the same quality as the blanket, slightly abrasive, the texture of something that has been wrung out too hard too many times, and hands it to Bess, who hands it to you. You dry yourself. Your hands are still shaking too hard to be entirely useful. Bess helps with your back, efficiently, without comment. So that's what that is, you think. That's the sound I was hearing, walking back to your room in the dry shift and your outer clothes retrieved from the floor, your whole skin tingling and burning with the returning warmth. You feel something you did not expect to feel. Alive, not grateful, not improved, not less melancholic, whatever Dr. Fenwick means by that word. Just absolutely, undeniably, undignifiably alive, every nerve end reporting in, every inch of skin aware, the cold flagstones through your shoes, the air on your still damp neck, the slight roughness of the shift's collar. Your body present and reporting and stubbornly, pointlessly, going about the business of being a body. You sit down at your table and pick up the needle and the linen and you start to work. 2 down, you think. Only God knows how many more to go. 3 weeks after your arrival on a Saturday, a day you know by the slight variation in Mrs. Dempsey's manner, more dressed up, more front parlour about her, something happening to her posture that suggests performance. 3 carriages arrive in the late morning. You hear them from the garden. You're doing your daily walking, counting steps, when you hear the horses and the creak of the gate. Then voices, not 1 or 2 voices, but several, overlapping, the sound of a group of people arriving somewhere. A woman's laugh, high and clear, the laugh of someone who has not recently spent 2 weeks sleeping in a room that smells of damp and mice. You stop walking. John is in the garden with you today. Bess has Saturdays off, and John does not yet have the professional impassivity Bess has developed over years. He's watching the house. Something in his face has closed. What is that, you ask? He doesn't look at you. Visitors. Whose visitors? A pause long enough to tell you that the answer is complicated. Then, Mrs. Dempsey does Saturday visits sometimes, for interested parties. You look at him. He's still not looking at you. Interested parties. You have heard of this. They tell you about it in London sometimes as entertainment. You had a cousin who mentioned it once, at a dinner, as a novelty. That one could pay to visit Bethlehem Hospital, the great madhouse on Moorfields, and walk through the galleries and observe the patients. Your cousin had described it in the way you describe a curiosity, an attraction. The patients as exhibits. Bethlehem charges a penny. It's one of London's entertainments. Private houses like Mrs. Dempsey's do something similar, on a smaller and more exclusive scale. 20 people perhaps, or 30 from the comfortable classes. People with money enough to pay Mrs. Dempsey some fee you cannot guess. They come on Saturdays. They walk through. They observe. We should go in, John says. His voice is flat. Why? Because Mrs. Dempsey wants. He stops, starts again. She wants the residents ready to be seen. Ready to be seen. You look at him steadily until his eyes finally come to yours, and when they do, they have a look in them that you understand, because it's the same look Bess has when she hands you the towel after the cold bath. The look of a person doing their job and knowing their job is wrong and not knowing what to do about either of those facts. I'll come in, you say. John, I need you to understand something. I am not what they say I am. I know, he says quietly. You blink. What? I know. Most of them aren't. He holds the door open. That doesn't help you. I know that too. You walk past him into the corridor. Mrs. Dempsey has arranged the common room, a room you rarely see, kept mostly locked, used for exactly this purpose, with chairs arranged in a curve, like a theatre. The women are being seated in the chairs. The attendants are dressed more neatly than usual. There is a small fire burning, which is a luxury you do not usually see. The visitors arrive 15 minutes later. They are exactly what you expected, and also somehow worse for being exactly what you expected. They are well dressed, the men in good coats, the women in good cloaks. Their clothes the clothes of people who've not been cold in a long time. There are 12 of them. Some are middle-aged, the comfortable age of money that has had time to settle. Some are younger, a pair of young men together who have the manner of people attending an outing, a curiosity, the kind of thing one talks about later over supper. One of the women has opera glasses. She's not using them yet. She is holding them. Mrs. Dempsey introduces the establishment with the practised warmth of a woman who has done this many times. The words compassionate care and modern treatment methods and remarkable results float through the room like soap bubbles, catching the firelight. You sit in your chair with your hands in your lap and your back straight. The same correctness that patience maintains, you think, suddenly seeing what that habit is for, and you look at the wall above the visitors' heads and you breathe carefully. One of the young men has drifted toward you. "What's your name?" he asks. It is a cheerful question, the tone someone uses when speaking to a child or a pet. He is perhaps 22. His coat is very good. "Margaret," you say. "And how long have you been with Mrs. Dempsey, Margaret?" "With?" As if you are an employee. 3 weeks and 4 days, you say. You keep your voice pleasant. Agnes told you, on your first day, keep your voice pleasant, always, regardless of what your face wants to do. Pleasant is less interesting. Interesting is dangerous. "Do you enjoy it here?" he asks. You look at him. There is a version of this moment where you say everything, where you say, "I am a woman of 27 years who was committed because I told my husband I did not love him, and I am held here by a legal framework that allows any man to put any woman in a building like this with the signature of any physician willing to write the word melancholia. And there are 11 other women in this building who are as sane as you are, and probably more so. And you are standing here in the warmth you've not offered us, with your opera glasses and your curiosity, and in 20 minutes you will go home and have supper, and I will go back to my room and lie under a rough blanket and count seconds until morning. There is that version." You smile slightly. "The garden is pleasant on fine days," you say. He nods, losing interest, and drifts toward Eleanor, who has begun one of her conversations with the empty air, which is more interesting in the entertainment sense, more worth bringing home to supper. Agnes is sitting 2 chairs from you. You catch her eye. Agnes's expression is absolutely serene. She has the look of someone who is somewhere else entirely, who has simply gone inside herself so thoroughly that the room is empty as far as she is concerned. "Teach me that," you think at her. Agnes gives the smallest possible nod. She does not look at you directly. Neither does she look at the visitors. She looks at a point slightly above and to the left of everything, and she waits. The visitors stay 40 minutes. When the last carriage leaves, the fire is allowed to die. The common room is locked. The residents are returned to their rooms. The extra neatness of the attendants' dress seems to unravel slightly as they walk, as if a tension has been released. You sit at your table with the linen in front of you and do not pick up the needle. Outside the window, the high window, the barred rectangle, the light is going early as it does in February. The sky shifts from the flat white of a cloud-covered afternoon to something greyer, the grey of things settling in. Interested parties. There are 12 people out there tonight who had their supper and said to each other, "Interesting," or "strange," or rather pitiable, wasn't she? The one with the opera glasses. Did you see the one by the wall talking to no one? You press the heels of your hands against your eyes. You feel very distinctly the pressure of your own hands against your own face, the slight give of the orbital bones, the darkness that comes when you push. You are still here. You are still real. You are not a curiosity. The nights are long. That sounds simple. In a life that has contained long nights of various kinds, nights of bad weather, nights of grief, nights of ordinary sleeplessness, you think you understood what a long night was. You did not. A long night in a room with bars on the window and locks on the door and an iron cuff around your wrist is a different geography from all other long nights. Time moves differently in the dark here. It thickens. It becomes a substance rather than a progression, something you have to push through. Eleanor's breathing beside you is slow and even. She sleeps somehow, with the ease of someone who has made terms with where she is. You envy her this and also fear it, the way you fear everything in here that looks like resignation. You lie on your back and look at the ceiling, which is invisible in the dark. You think carefully, methodically, about things that have no relation to this room. You think about the essay you were reading when Dr. Fenick and Thomas came to the parlour, a woman's essay about the nature of education, about whether the mind of a woman and the mind of a man were differently constituted, or whether the differences were entirely of cultivation, of what had been planted and what had been allowed to grow. You had been reading it in the late afternoon, with the fire low and the lamp bright, and you had been thinking yes at almost every sentence, the slightly giddy yes of finding your own thoughts already articulated by someone else. You reconstruct the essay paragraph by paragraph. You are not sure how accurate you are, but the exercise requires precision, and precision keeps the mind sharp, and the mind being sharp is what you have instead of freedom. Then you think about the wall in the garden, the gap the loose bar would make, the 8 feet of wall above, the broken glass on top. There are ways around broken glass, you think. A folded blanket, several layers of linen wrapped tight. You think about the distance between the window and the wall, about whether, if you reached the wall, you could scale it, about what would be on the other side, a street, Hoxton Street, people, day or night, witnesses or help or both. You think about where you would go. You cannot go home, that much is clear. You cannot go to Thomas. You cannot go to your aunt, who sided with Thomas. You could go to Charlotte, perhaps. Charlotte, who is the daughter of a printer, and has a mind like a scalpel, and who would, you think, you believe, not turn you away, though you do not know for certain, and you would be a risk to Charlotte. A woman escaped from a madhouse is not someone whose company is without consequences for those who provide it. You think about this for a long time. Then you stop, not because you've resolved it, you haven't, but because the thinking without action has its own danger, the danger of obsession, of a plan that curdles into fantasy, and you are being careful about the difference between those things. You breathe, you count. 100. This second is real. 99. This second is passing. At some point the counting becomes sleep. You don't notice the transition, which is perhaps the only mercy of this place. On a morning in the 3rd week, Bess brings, with the breakfast tray, a letter. Your name is on the outside in Thomas's handwriting. Mrs. M. Ashworth. The letter's precise and slightly forward-leaning. The handwriting of a man who learned penmanship from someone who valued precision over individuality. You hold it for a moment, then you open it. The letter is 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph asks after your health and expresses the hope that you're receiving proper care. The second paragraph informs you that the house in Cheapside is being managed without difficulty, that your wardrobe has been inventoried and the winter clothes put away, and that Mrs. Ashworth, Thomas's mother, has taken on supervision of the household. The third paragraph says that Thomas prays daily for your recovery, and looks forward to the day when Dr. Fenick recommends you fit to return home. There is no mention of love. There is no mention of the conversation that preceded all of this. There is no acknowledgement that you've been placed in a room with iron on the window and a cuff for your wrist and cold water poured over you twice a week. The letter has the tone of a letter to a person who is slightly ill and slightly distant, slightly inconvenient, and who will, with luck and prayer and the appropriate professionals, become convenient again. You fold it and put it in the pocket of your outer dress. Then you eat the cold porridge. Later, in the garden, you take out the letter. You turn it over. The back is blank. You think about what you would write if you were allowed to write letters. You are not yet, not until Dr. Fenwick decides you have sufficient composure, a word that means sufficient agreement to be trustworthy. Until then, any message to the outside world goes through Mrs. Dempsey, which means it goes nowhere. But if you were writing a letter, dear Thomas, you think, I am cold. I am cold every morning and every night and most of the days between. I am well enough fed, which is more than some here. I am not mad. I have not been mad at any point since I arrived. I have watched another woman, who is perhaps genuinely suffering from some disorder of the mind, decline over 2 years in the care of this institution, and I believe the institution is making her worse, not better, which is perhaps the most medically interesting observation available in this building, though Dr. Fenwick has not asked for it. I think about the things I want to do and cannot do here. I think about books. I think about walking down a street without bars on the windows. I think about bread that is fresh. I told you I did not love you, and that was true, but it was also not the whole truth, which is that I did not know what I felt, and I thought if I said the true thing, the confused real thing, we might be able to navigate it. I didn't know the consequence of saying the true thing. I know now. What I have learned here is that the truth from a woman in a room with a husband and a doctor in it is not truth. It is evidence. I will not make that mistake again. I am not writing this letter. I know I am not writing this letter, but it helps to think it anyway. Your wife, Margaret. You put the blank paper back in your pocket. The woman whose name you never learned, the one you called Clockwork, because of the regular timing of her evening weeping, dies on a Thursday in the 4th week. She dies quietly, which is the way that some people die in places like this, where the body has been through too much cold and too little food, and too long a winter without enough warmth or comfort or hope. She's found by Bess in the morning, on her side on the narrow bed, already cold. Mrs. Dempsey manages this with the same professional competence with which she manages everything. A surgeon is called. The cause of death is recorded as apoplexy, a brain event, nothing to do with the establishment, nothing that implicates Dr. Fenwick or cold baths or the quality of the food. The woman's room is cleaned. Her few belongings are assembled into a small bundle, which is sent to a family member whose address Mrs. Dempsey apparently has. No one speaks of it among the residents, but you all know. You know by the silence of the attendants. You know by the way Patience walks past that room in the afternoon with her eyes fixed straight ahead, her back impossibly straight, her jaw set with the controlled effort of someone carrying something they will not put down. Agnes comes to find you after supper. How old was she, you ask? 39. Agnes sits on the chair. Her hands are folded in her lap with the settled quality of hands that have learned how to wait. Her name was Sarah. She'd been here 18 months. What was she here for? Her husband found her in correspondence with a man he didn't approve of. A pause. The correspondence was not romantic, I believe. He was her cousin. He owed her money. You don't say anything. She was not well when she came, Agnes says quietly. I want to be honest with you. She was genuinely distressed. Whether the distress warranted confinement is another question. Whether what was done here helped her is... She stops. Another question also. You sit with that. The fire in the room has gone out. There is never enough coal to keep it past 8. And the cold is settling back in. The cold that lives in the walls of this building the way mice live in walls, always there, always waiting. Agnes, you say, will you tell me something? Honestly? I'll try. Why? Are you still... Why haven't you stop? Try again. Have you ever tried to leave? Agnes looks at you for a long moment. Her expression is complex, too many things in it to read cleanly. Patience and grief, and something else. Something that might be a decision being made. Yes, she says. What happened? I reached the wall. Her voice is level. I was brought back. My son was told, and he had my term extended by a year, and my privileges reduced. She looks at her hands. Patience is not a virtue I was born with. I have been forced to grow it here. She stands. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, she says. It means you should be better at it than I was. She goes to the door, knocks once, the signal for the attendant to unlock. Before she leaves, she looks back at you over her shoulder. Sarah's room is empty tonight, she says. Her window faced the back wall. The door closes. You sit very still. Then you pick up the needle and you work by the last of the candle until the flame gutters out. I want to step back here for a moment, because there's a thing about private madhouses that we need to understand, and the story lives inside this thing, not outside it. In 1763, when Margaret is lying in that cold room counting seconds in this exact year, there is no lunacy act protecting her. There is no system of inspection that means anything. There is a law from 1744 that technically requires a magistrate's certification for confinement, but in practice, private madhouses operate with extraordinary freedom from oversight. Dr. Fenick's signature is enough. Mrs. Dempsey's license is enough. Thomas's money is enough. A woman can be placed in a building like this for as little as the price of a letter. The 1763 Act for regulating private madhouses, which does exist and was passed in part because of exactly the kind of case that Margaret represents, comes too late for her. It requires county justices to inspect establishments and creates a regulatory body. It is an improvement. It is not a salvation. The problem runs deeper than regulation. It runs into the question of property. In 1763, a married woman in England is, at law, approximately equivalent to property herself. A doctrine called coverture means that her legal identity is absorbed into her husband's upon marriage. She cannot own property in her own name. She cannot sign contracts. She cannot sue in court. The modest inheritance her father left her, the cloth merchant's bequest, the thing she argued with Thomas about, is legally his. The children she carried and lost are legally his. The opinions she formed in her own skull are, in the eyes of the law, subject to his judgment of their soundness. And if his judgment is that she is unsound, the door locks. 3 sounds. And that's that. This is not a story about one cruel husband. Thomas is not particularly cruel. Thomas is a product of a system that has given him so much power he has probably never had to think about it. The way you don't think about the weight of air because air has always been there. The women in Mrs. Dempsey's establishment are not there because of exceptional wickedness. They're there because the system has a slot for inconvenient women, and the slot exists because the alternative, taking women's inconvenience seriously, asking what it is responding to, treating it as information rather than disorder, would require dismantling a great deal of very comfortable furniture. Nobody wants to do that. The doctors believe in what they're doing mostly. The families believe they're acting in their womenfolk's best interests mostly. Mrs. Dempsey believes she's running a humane establishment mostly. Everyone is mostly believing something, and 16 women sleep in a house with bars on the windows. Spring comes to Mrs. Dempsey's the way spring comes to all cold places, first as a rumour, then as a scent in the garden air, then as actual warmth in the afternoon sun, actual warmth. Not just the relative warmth of a sheltered spot, but the real thing. April warmth. The mud in the garden dries to something harder, and the corners where it has been half frozen all winter begin to show, improbably, small threads of green. The garden hour extends to 45 minutes. Mrs. Dempsey's inspection season charity. You walk your lengths and you think. You've been here 3 months now. 3 months is a different kind of time than the first 3 weeks. 3 weeks is a sprint. You are in shock, in resistance, burning energy you don't have against the simple fact of where you are. 3 months is a marathon. 3 months is what comes after the sprint, when you've had to find a different kind of movement, a different kind of breathing, slower, more careful, sustainability. You have learned things. You have learned that the loose bar in the back corridor window can be removed and replaced in under 30 seconds if you know the angle. You know this because you tested it one evening when John fell asleep at 8 o'clock in his chair. He does this sometimes in the second month of winter, when the cold and the long hours are grinding even the attendants down. And you walked to the corridor and stood at the window and put your hands on the bar and felt it move. You have learned that the back wall's glass is set in a section of about 4 feet on the east side, and there is a section at the far corner where the mortar has been cracked by frost and refrozen so many times that the glass in it is loose and has shifted sideways. You have learned from Mary that the street on the other side of the wall is called Buttermilk Lane, and that in the early morning before 6 it is mostly empty. You have not left. You have not left because you are thinking carefully about what happens after. Because Agnes got to the wall and was brought back, and bringing back came at a cost, and you're not prepared to pay the same cost unless you are prepared also for what comes next, unless you have somewhere to go, and you have been working on that. 3 months into your stay, Dr. Fenick upgrades your status. Patient shows marked improvement in composure and compliance with treatment. Recommend reduction in restraint and controlled correspondence privileges. Controlled correspondence means your letters are read before they go out. You knew this. You've been writing to Charlotte, carefully, very carefully, in the language of a woman who is well and grateful and recovering nicely, in between the lines of which you've been laying what you hope is a map. The first letter talked about the garden. In describing the garden, you mentioned that the east corner wall had beautiful old mortar. You mentioned the gate on Buttermilk Lane. You mentioned that you went to the garden each morning between 9 and 9:45. The second letter thanked Charlotte for her friendship. You mentioned that you had been given, as a great treat, a small cake at Easter, and that the best moments here were the moments of unexpected kindness, of which the rarest and most valuable was being trusted. The third letter said you hoped Charlotte might visit. You said you were allowed visitors on Wednesday afternoons, between 2 and 4. You said the front gate was open during visiting hours. You said you looked forward to seeing a friend. You folded each letter and handed it to Bess, and Bess read it, and, presumably, Mrs. Dempsey read it. And none of them saw anything in it that was not the communications of a recovering patient who was, as advertised, improving in composure. Whether Charlotte received the letters, you don't know. Whether Charlotte understood them, you don't know. You wait. The Wednesday 3 weeks after you sent the third letter is a day that begins exactly like every other day. The porridge, the small beer, the bread, the sewing, the rough linen, the blunt needle, the seams that you make even Anita's protest. The cold bath, they've reduced to once a week now, another small concession of inspection season, and the water is somehow less terrible in April than it was in February. Cold, but not the bone-deep cold of winter. The garden, you walk your lengths. The sun is out today. Properly out, the first real sun since October. It falls on the back of your neck and on the mud path and on the new green coming up in the corner, and you close your eyes for a moment and feel it. At 9:37, you know this because you've been counting. You hear the front gate, footsteps in the corridor, Mrs. Dempsey's voice, warm and managing, the visitor parlour voice, then another voice, and the sound of that voice goes through you like the first light through the window. Charlotte's voice. You keep walking. You keep counting. Your face does not change. You've been practicing your face for 3 months. But your heart is hammering. Charlotte is here. Charlotte is here, and that means she received the letters, and it means she read them, really read them, and it means she came. At 10:20, Bess comes to the garden door. Visitor Mrs. Ashworth. You walk in from the garden, across the corridor, past the window with the bar, past the door to the common room, to the visitor parlour. Charlotte is standing by the window. She looks very slightly wrong in this room. Her colouring is too vivid, her posture too easy. She takes up space the way people take up space when they have not been trained by months of smallness. She is 29 years old, a printer's daughter who now runs her father's business since his death. A woman who has never in her life done what she was told simply because she was told to do it. And seeing her standing in Mrs. Dempsey's visitor parlour is like watching a river try to fit through a keyhole. Mrs. Dempsey is not in the room. That's something. Bess is at the door. That's less something. You cross to Charlotte. You take her hands. They are ink-stained. She always has ink somewhere, Charlotte. It gets into the skin. The ink is cool and slightly rough under your fingers, the most normal texture you've felt in 3 months. "How are you?" Charlotte says. Her voice is controlled. You can see the effort of controlling it. "Very well," you say. "Much improved." Bess is by the door looking at the corridor. "I brought you something," Charlotte says. She opens her bag, a large bag, the kind you can fit a great deal into, and produces a book, which she hands you with both hands the way books are handed when they matter. You take it. It is heavy, heavier than a book this size should be. You look at Charlotte. She looks at you. "The latest essays," she says loudly for Bess's benefit. "I know you enjoy them." Then very quietly, not moving her lips much, "Inside the back cover." You hold the book against your chest. You talk with Charlotte for the allotted 30 minutes. Mrs. Dempsey comes in at 15 minutes and sits in the corner chair, which is normal for supervised visits, and you talk about Charlotte's printing business and the weather and the garden, and Charlotte is extraordinary. She is simply extraordinary. She talks about these things with complete ease and naturalness. No strain in her voice, no fear, and you match her. You keep up. You do not let your voice shake or your hands tremble. When the 30 minutes are up, Mrs. Dempsey says, "We should let Mrs. Ashworth rest." Charlotte squeezes your hands. Her grip is firm and brief and contains an entire conversation. Then she leaves. In your room, with Eleanor pretending to nap because Eleanor has learned to give you privacy when you need it, you open the back cover of the book. There is a folded paper tucked between the backboard and the end paper. You unfold it. Charlotte has written, in her small, precise printer's hand, Tuesday, 2 a.m, the lane. I will be there. Bring nothing you cannot leave behind. Below that, there is a woman who was a patient there 18 months ago. She told me the rest. You fold the paper into the smallest possible square and press it into the seam of your shift, the inner hem, where no casual inspection would find it. Then you open the book to the first page and read, for the first time in 3 months, words that someone wrote with the intention that you would read them. It is the most luxury you have experienced since November. Tuesday is 4 days away. 4 days is a very specific quantity of time when you know what is at the end of it. It is not the vague, formless time of the previous 3 months, time without horizon or landmark, just the same track running in the same loop. This is different. This is time with a shape. 4 days, each one a distinct unit with a beginning and an end, each one to be survived and then crossed off like a debt being paid down. You sew the linen. You do your walking in the garden. You eat the cold porridge and the small beer and the bread, mechanically, carefully, storing warmth. You sleep, or attempt to, lying in the dark, counting seconds while Eleanor murmurs at the wall. And you plan. Planning, you've discovered, is something the body participates in as much as the mind. You feel it in your stomach, a low, constant awareness, not quite fear and not quite excitement, something between the two that lives in the same space where hunger lives. You feel it in your hands when you pick up the sewing, the slight hesitation before your fingers settle to work, the half second when your hands would rather be doing something else entirely. You keep your face very still. You have become, these past months, an accomplished keeper of still faces. You think if you ever return to ordinary life, when, you correct yourself, when, you will be a formidable card player. Tuesday night comes the way nights come here, which is to say all at once. The supper trays, the evening quiet. Mrs. Dempsey's slow progress through the house, the final check, the bolts and the locks. The candles going out one by one, the light under the door narrowing and then disappearing. Eleanor falls asleep. You wait. You have the linen, 3 pieces of it from your sewing pile. You've been taking pieces one at a time, tucking them into the hem of your outer dress, accumulating quietly over 4 days. They're not large pieces, but folded and wrapped, they will do for what you need them to do. You have, tucked into the same hem, the iron pin that Bess uses to close the collar of her apron, which went missing on Saturday when you were in proximity to the apron. You have felt terrible about taking it. You have also not put it back. At 1 o'clock in the morning, which you know by the church bell that carries on clear nights from somewhere south, you sit up. The iron cuff is on your wrist. You've been working the lock for 3 weeks, whenever Bess fixes it slightly loosely, testing the mechanism, learning it. It's a simple lock, simple. Locks are designed to keep in people who are confused or sedated, not people who are paying close attention. You take the pin and you work the lock for 2 minutes, maybe 3. Your hands are steady, the steadiness of someone who's been practicing composure for 3 months. The cuff opens. You put it down on the mattress quietly. The chain makes a small sound, a soft clink, and you hold your breath. Eleanor doesn't stir. You dress in the dark, knowing the placement of each item by feel. The rough shift. The outer dress slightly too big because the weight has come off you in here, because the portions are small and the cold burns what the portions put in. The shoes which you set in the same spot every night. Left shoe, right shoe, against the right leg of the table, so you can find them without light. The linen wrapped around your hands and forearms, under the sleeves. You stand at the door. The door has 2 locks and a bolt. This is where you might stop. This is the place. Where the plan has always been slightly soft, slightly unresolved, because there is no elegant answer to a locked door from the inside. But there is a real one. You knock, very softly, twice. The signal that means I need the chamber pot. A shuffle in the corridor. The night attendant this week is a man you don't know well. A fill-in someone Bess mentioned was covering because the usual Tuesday night attendant was ill. Fill-ins are less practiced. They follow procedures more mechanically. The procedure for I need the chamber pot is unlock, open, hand in the pot if needed, relock. The bolt slides, the lower lock turns, the upper lock turns, the door opens 4 inches. You put your shoulder to it. You hadn't been particularly physical in your life. You were not the kind of child who climbed things or ran into things. But 3 months of walking 3,000 steps a day in a frozen garden has done something to your legs, and 3 months of sewing with your arms extended has done something to your shoulders, and you put everything you have into the door and it goes back with a sound like a shout, and the fill-in attendant stumbles, and you're through the door and into the corridor before he has finished being surprised. Hey, stop! You are running. Your shoes on the stone floor are too loud, catastrophically loud, a sound that fills the whole corridor, but you're running anyway because the alternative to running is not running, and not running is unthinkable. The back corridor, 3rd window from the left. You have the bar out in its 30 seconds. You've done it so many times in practice that your hands do it before your mind catches up, and then you are up on the sill, which is narrow and cold under your hands, pulling yourself through the gap. Your shoulder catches the frame. Something tears. Your dress, not you. And then you are through and falling. The ground is closer than you expected. You land on your feet and one hand, a jarring impact that travels up through your wrists into your elbows, and you bite back the sound. No time. The east corner, the cracked mortar, you run along the base of the wall, your right hand trailing along the brick. The garden is dark, genuinely dark, no moon tonight, and the ground is uneven and you stumble twice but don't fall. The wall curves, the corner. Your hands find the section where the glass has shifted. The linen goes around your palms, around your fingers, wrapped tight. You feel the pressure of it, the slight restriction, and under it the cold of the wrapping against your skin. You grip the top of the wall, the glass cuts through. You feel it clearly, the specific sharp line of it along the outer edge of your left palm. But you've been cold and you've been bled and you've been poured over with winter water, and the cut is a small thing compared to all of that. And you pull. Getting over a wall in skirts in the dark is not elegant. You will not describe it as elegant. What it is effortful, and undignified, and about 40 seconds of the most concentrated physical work of your life, your arms shaking, your feet scrabbling against the brick, the rough surface dragging at your dress, the linen on your hands slipping slightly as you shift your grip, and then you are on the top of the wall, and below you in the dark, Buttermilk Lane, empty, quiet, the smell of the street coming up at you, mud and horse and coal and the faint salt of the city's enormous collective breath. And it is the best smell in the world. It is the smell of outside, of a street, of a city that does not have bars on its windows. You drop. This landing is worse than the first. Your left ankle turns on something cobbled, and for a second the pain is bright enough to be blinding, and you stand very still with your hand against the wall, breathing hard. Then you stand straight. You're on the outside of the wall. You're on Buttermilk Lane. You start walking. The city at Tuin. The morning is not the city, you know. You have walked London streets in the daytime. You have walked them in the evening. But you have not, until tonight, walked them at 2 a.m, alone, with a bleeding left hand and a turned ankle, and your dress slightly torn, and your hair coming down from the pins. The streets near Hoxton are quieter than the centre. The trades here are different. Tanning yards and brick kilns and market gardens, the industries that the city needs but prefers not to smell. In the daytime these streets have their own noise. At night they are mostly silence, the silence of working neighbourhoods where people sleep because they must be up before dawn. You walk south. Your ankle aches with each step, but it's a weight-bearing ache, not a broken ache. You can walk on it. You have had 3 months of walking 3,000 steps a day, and you can walk on worse than this. The cold is real. An April night in London is not as cold as February, but it is cold. Enough! And you left your outer coat behind because there was no time, and the dress is not warm, and your hands are bleeding slightly, and the blood is cold and sticky where the linen wrapping has soaked through. You stop under a yard gate to rewrap your hand with the cleaner piece of linen. The wrapping is not neat, you can't see well enough, but it's pressure, and pressure is what you need. Then you keep walking. The streets narrow as you move into older neighbourhoods. The houses lean together overhead, their upper stories overhanging the lanes until, in places, the lane itself is almost enclosed. A tunnel of buildings, dark and smelling of the accumulated life of too many people in too little space. A man steps out of a doorway. Your heart goes. He looks at you. You look at him. He is drunk, you think, or nearly drunk, not focused enough to be a threat, just processing your existence with the slow difficulty of someone whose machinery is running sluggishly. Night, he says. Good night, you say. He disappears back into the doorway. You breathe. Keep walking. The streets show evidence of the night's business. A spilled basket near a tavern door, the straw scattered across the cobbles, a dog asleep in a doorway, who opens one eye as you pass and then closes it again, having concluded you are not relevant. 2 cats conducting a negotiation in an alley, their voices low and intense. A woman at a street corner, her cloak drawn close, who watches you pass with the professional assessment of someone sizing up a situation. You nod at her. She nods back. No transaction occurs. You're obviously not a transaction. You walk for what feels like a long time and is probably 40 minutes, and with each minute the built-up cold of the house is doing something strange to your body. You're not getting warmer exactly, but you're generating heat, the heat of movement, and the combination of cold air and moving muscles is making you feel more awake than you have felt in 3 months, more present, more bodily. Your ankle counts every step. You are aware of every cobble. You are aware of the smell of the air which changes with each new street. Coal smoke, then horse, then the specific green smell of the market garden south of the road, then the unmistakable complex smell of the river, getting stronger as you go south. Salt and mud and old wood and something you cannot name that has lived in the Thames for so many centuries it is simply itself now, simply London. At a corner where 3 streets meet, under a lamp that is burning low and smoking black, a boy is asleep on the stones with his head on a bundle of torches. A link boy slept through his work. You look at him for a moment. He's perhaps 12 years old, thin in the way that children are thin when they don't get enough, his face dirty, his shoes not quite shoes, more the idea of shoes. You take the cleanest coin you have. You have 3 shillings and 4 pence in your pocket, retrieved from the inner hem before you left your private emergency reserves, and you lay 1 shilling very quietly next to his hand. Then you walk on. Charlotte is at the end of Farringdon Lane. She's standing beside a hackney carriage, her arms folded, her face doing the thing Charlotte's face does when she is frightened but has decided not to show it. A stillness, an attention, the look of a woman taking inventory. When she sees you, she doesn't run. She walks toward you at a pace that could be, to anyone watching, simply a woman crossing the street. She takes your hands, she looks at the linen, she looks at your face. How badly, she says. Not badly, you say. I walked on it. The hand. Not deeply. It needs cleaning. She looks at you for another moment, that inventory look. You look, she says, very carefully, like yourself. You realize what she means. She was, you see now, afraid you would not. Afraid that 3 months in that place would have done the thing that places that do, worn away the specific contours of a person, smooth them down to something more manageable, more general. I am myself, you tell her. She nods. Good. She moves you toward the carriage. Then get in. We have until morning. What comes after is complicated. The way most real things are complicated. You stay with Charlotte for 3 weeks, in the rooms above the print shop that Charlotte took over from her father and made her own. Rooms that smell of paper and ink and the particular dusty warmth of old machinery. A smell that is, after Mrs. Dempsey's, close to paradise. You sleep on a real bed, with a proper blanket, and the window of your room has no bars, and you stand at it every morning for several minutes, just looking out at the street below, at the ordinary traffic of ordinary life, and breathing. Charlotte cleans the cut on your hand, which is not deep, but goes across the palm's heel in a way that takes time to heal. She puts liniment on your ankle, which is swollen but not broken, and wraps it in proper bandage, real bandage, the clean kind. She gives you food, actual food, hot food, food that has flavour and warmth and arrives in adequate quantities. You eat all of it. You help in the print shop when your hand allows. You learn to set type, the individual letters, each one a small metal block with a raised face, placed backward in the compositing stick, right to left, the words building in reverse. You learn the smell of printing ink, which is black and thick and cold in the morning before the press warms it, a smell of oil and carbon and something almost sweet underneath. You learn the satisfying heavy thunk of the press coming down. You learn to be useful. Thomas does not come himself. He sends a solicitor. The solicitor comes to Charlotte's door on a Wednesday morning 3 days after your escape. They must have begun looking immediately, which means someone told them quickly, which means the fill-in attendant or Mrs. Dempsey or both. and Charlotte speaks to him at the door while you stand in the print room with your hands in a typecase. Very still, very quiet. The solicitor says that Thomas wishes you to return home, that the matter of the solicitor uses the word episode. Your episode can be resolved quietly without further disruption, that Dr. Fenwick has prepared a new course of treatment, that the house in Cheapside is waiting. Charlotte tells the solicitor that she has no knowledge of your whereabouts. The solicitor looks at Charlotte with the look of a man who knows this is not entirely true and has decided that Charlotte is not worth the time it would take to press the point. He goes. You breathe again. You could still be taken. That is the reality of your situation, the reality of the law in 1763. You've escaped from a licensed establishment. Thomas has not withdrawn his medical authorization. You're still legally his wife, which means you're still legally his problem to manage. But Charlotte is a printer, and printers have relationships, and some of those relationships are with newspapers, and some of those newspapers are interested in stories about private madhouses and the women kept in them. Charlotte sits you down one evening and talks to you about this with the directness that is simply her nature. There's a writer, she says. His name is Cross. He's been gathering information about private establishments for over a year. He knows about Bethlehem, he knows about 2 houses in Southwark, and he knows a little about Mrs. Dempsey's. What he doesn't have is a witness who can speak plainly. And if I speak, you say, what happens? It goes in print. Thomas would be... She pauses, weighing her words. Embarrassed, significantly. The kind of embarrassment that changes what is practical. He could still have me confined again. He could. It would be considerably more expensive to do so quietly after a published account. And Thomas is, she says, and her voice has a note of studied fairness. A man who minds about appearances. You sit with that. Outside the print shop window, the street is doing its evening business. A woman with a basket is arguing cheerfully with a fishmonger. 2 men are moving a piece of furniture down the street, manoeuvring it around a cart, shouting instructions to each other. A child is chasing a dog around the lamppost. The ordinary machinery of the world. Cross needs me to speak to him, you say. Yes? And then it goes in print. Yes. And that, you say slowly, is the only way this ends with me not going back. Charlotte doesn't say anything. Yes, you say, answering yourself. Then yes. His name is Edmund Cross, and he meets you in the back room of a bookshop off Fleet Street, on a morning when the rain is coming down outside in sheets, and the street smells of wet stone, and the city's particular wet dog smell that only emerges in hard rain. He is younger than you expected, 30 perhaps, with an ink stain on the first 2 fingers of his right hand that tells you he writes a great deal, and a way of listening that is the opposite of Dr. Fenick's assessing silence. Dr. Fenick listens to hear what he expected. Cross listens to hear what he doesn't. He has paper in front of him and a good pen. You notice the pen, the quality of it, because you've been mending linens with a blunt needle for 3 months, and the sight of a well-cut quill makes something in you respond. Tell me what you want me to know, he says. No preamble, no false sympathy. You tell him. You tell him about Thomas and the parlour and Dr. Fenwick's leather case. You tell him about the carriage and Bess's averted eyes. You tell him about the room and the iron cuff and the cold baths. You tell him about Sarah, who died in March and whose death was recorded as apoplexy. You tell him about the Saturday visitors and the woman with the opera glasses and the young man in the good coat. You tell him about Agnes. who has been there 4 years, who reached the wall and was brought back, who taught you to keep your voice pleasant. You tell him about Patience, who stopped saying the name James. You tell him about Eleanor, who may be genuinely ill and who is not getting better, who is getting quieter, smaller, more translated into whatever the institution needs her to be. You tell him all of this in a level voice, without weeping, which is not because you don't want to weep, but because you have learned in the past 3 months that composure is a form of power, and you're not handing it to anyone who hasn't earned it. Cross writes for the entire hour and a quarter. He writes quickly, with the efficiency of a man who has done this for a long time, and occasionally he says, "And then? And what specifically? And can you give me the date?" When you're done, he looks at his notes. "Can I ask you something personal?" he says. "I reserve the right not to answer." "Fair enough," he looks at you. "Do you think you will be believed?" The question lands cleanly, without softening. "Some people will believe me," you say. "Some won't. Some will believe the story and still think it's a woman's problem, an individual story, one bad establishment, not the thing underneath, not the law." What is the thing underneath? That a man can take his wife to a house and lock the door, and a doctor will provide the paperwork for it. Not because he's a monster, because it's legal, because it's easy, because she is his. Cross writes that down. Coverture, says. Coverture, you say. And the fact that arguing against your own confinement is taken as evidence that you should be confined. The infinite loop. Yes. He looks at his notes again. "I'll have a piece in the London Chronicle within the month," he says. "With or without your name, that's your decision." You have thought about this. You have thought about it since Charlotte first mentioned Cross. The name attached to a published account is a kind of protection, harder to simply quietly recommit a named public woman, and also a kind of exposure, a target. "With my name," you say. He nods once, as if this is what he expected. "Then we're done," he says, "unless you have anything else." "Tell people about Agnes," you say. "She's been there 4 years. She's 61 years old, and she reached the wall and they extended her term for it. She is the sanest person I've ever met, and she is in a room with a woman who cannot speak, and she has been there for 4 years. Cross writes it down. "I will," he says. The piece runs in the London Chronicle on a Tuesday in June. It runs on the 3rd page below a report about parliamentary proceedings and above an advertisement for a patent remedy for gout. It is not the front page. It is not, in the scale of what the Chronicle covers, a major story. But it runs. And things happen after it runs that you did not entirely predict. 3 letters arrive at the print shop for you in the week after publication. One is from a woman you don't know, whose sister she believes is being held in a house in Southwark and has been for 8 months, and who wants to know if there is anything to be done. One is from a man who identifies himself as a magistrate's clerk, who says the piece has raised questions that the magistrate is considering in his review of current licensing practices. One is from a woman who signs herself only AV, who says simply, "I was there. What you described is true. Thank you for writing it. Agnes. You think it is Agnes. You cannot prove it. Thomas sends no letter." What Thomas does, according to Charlotte's information from mutual social circles, is become very quiet. He attends church. He manages his business. He does not, as far as anyone can determine, move to have you recommitted. Charlotte's analysis. He minds about appearances, and right now the cost of the appearance of being the man in the Chronicle story is higher than the cost of a wife, who is not present. You don't find this satisfying exactly. Satisfaction would require justice, And justice is not what happened here. What happened is that a particular calculation changed. Thomas has not been punished. Dr. Fenwick has not been punished. Mrs. Dempsey's establishment continues to operate. The 16 women, different women now, or some different, some the same, are still in the rooms. What happened is that one woman got out and wrote it down, and it cost something, and perhaps a few people in positions of authority are thinking slightly differently about the licensing review. That is not justice. But it is a small, real thing. You have learned these past months to attend carefully to small, real things. Now let me tell you something about what this world looks like from a longer distance. The private madhouse system in England runs from roughly the early 1700s through the Victorian era, and the story of women in it is a story that repeats itself in the same pattern over and over for well over a century. The pattern is woman becomes inconvenient. Husband, father or brother seeks medical assistance. Doctor provides certification. Woman disappears. The women who disappear are not, in the majority of the surviving accounts, what we would recognise as mentally ill. Some of them are grieving, and we know now, as they did not know then, that grief is not madness, that the loss of a child or a spouse or a life can break a person open in ways that take years to heal, and that breaking open is not the same as being broken. Some of them are difficult in the specific way that intelligent women are difficult when the world they live in is too small for them. Some of them are simply wives whose husbands found them inconvenient, whose assets their husbands wanted, whose property was most easily managed if the owner was elsewhere. The legal machinery that permits this is coverture. The word comes from the French couverture, covering, shelter, concealment. The doctrine holds that upon marriage, a woman's legal identity is covered by her husband's. She ceases, legally, to exist as an independent person. She cannot own property, she cannot sue, she cannot sign contracts, she cannot, in the eyes of the law, act on her own behalf. This is not a law anyone invented in anger or malice. It is a law that grew up over centuries in a society that organised itself around men's relationships to land and to each other, and in which women were pieces moved on a board that men were playing. The men playing the board were not mostly monsters. Most of them loved their wives and daughters in the real, complex human way that people love the people who live in their houses with them. But the love and the power existed side by side without anyone having to examine the arrangement, because the arrangement was the water they swam in, and you don't examine water. The 1763 Act for regulating private madhouses is the first serious attempt to examine the water. It passes after a series of cases, Margaret's case and cases like it, come to public attention through the papers. It requires inspection of establishments. It creates a licensing regime that has some teeth in it. It is not enough. The Act is improved in 1774, improved again in 1828. The Lunacy Act of 1845 creates the first commissioners in lunacy with real powers of oversight. The 1890 Lunacy Act, written in part in response to documented abuses, requires judicial authorization before any person can be confined. From one woman unable to refuse a doctor with a leather case and a document already written out, to a requirement for a judge's signature. 127 years. 127 years of women like Margaret going through those gates, past the freshly painted sign, through the parlour that smells of beeswax, into the room beyond. But the story doesn't end with laws entirely. because the question underneath the laws, who decides, and on what basis that a woman's mind is not to be trusted with authority over her own life, that question is still being written. The answer in 1763 is her husband and his doctor, on any basis they choose to articulate. The answer in 1890 is a judge, on the basis of medical testimony, on criteria somewhat better defined. The answer in 1930 is slightly better still. The answer today is, in most of the world, considerably better, constructed out of legal protections and medical ethics, and a long, painful accumulation of cases in which the pattern was recognised for what it was, and the recognition made it slightly harder to perpetuate. But the knowledge of how easy it once was, that is not comfortable knowledge. It is the kind of knowledge that sits in the chest, heavy and still, the way Sarah sat still on that Thursday morning when Bess came in. Take care of it, is what I'm saying. Take care of the knowledge. You're staying in Charlotte's rooms above the print shop for 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, you relearn what the world feels like when you're inside it, instead of watching it through a barred rectangle. The market at Smithfield on a Thursday morning, the smell of it before you see it, animal and earthy and loud. The animals themselves pressing together in their pens, the dealers moving through with their quick eyes, the butcher's boys threading between legs and hooves, and the general alarming proximity of large living things. You buy apples and feel the smooth wax of the skin under your fingers, feel the cold weight of each one, and you eat the first apple standing at the market edge, and the juice goes down your chin, and you don't care even slightly. The Thames on a clear morning, walking along the embankment where the watermen call out to each other across the water, their voices carrying and mixing with the creak of rigging and the lap of water against stone stairs. The river is brown and vast and slightly threatening and completely indifferent to everything, and you find that indifference, that enormous geological patience somehow stabilising. The Thames was here before Mrs. Dempsey and will be here after. The bookshop off Covent Garden where Charlotte buys paper stock, and where you stand for 20 minutes reading the new arrivals, moving from one volume to the next with the physical greediness of a person who's been hungry and is now, finally, in a kitchen. You help Charlotte with the press. The type is metal and cold in the morning, each individual letter a small weight in your fingers, and you set a page of type and then you ink it, and you bring the press down and you lift the page and there is the text, clean and black and real. These same words you set with your hands, now permanent, now existing in the world. This is how it works, you think. This is how the words that matter get out. Your hand heals. The scar on your palm is thin and slightly pink, running across the heel of your hand from the little finger toward the wrist. It will be there, probably, for years. When you press your thumb against it, you feel the slight raised edge of it, the same sensation as the scab on your knuckle in those early dark days at Mrs. Dempsey's. You are still here. You are still a body with a healing hand and recovering skin. That is today. Enough. 7 months after your escape, a letter arrives. It comes via Charlotte's shop, addressed in a hand you don't recognise. The paper is cheap. The seal is a plain wax press, no mark. Inside, Mrs. Ashworth. I hope this finds you in health. I have been told you are the lady who wrote in the Chronicle. I am told you knew Agnes. Agnes passed away in August, peacefully, in her sleep. She was 62. Her son came for the body. She had been there 5 years. I am Patience. You will remember me. I am no longer at Mrs. Dempsey's. My mother came for me in June, after she read the paper. She had not known. I believe she had not known. James and I were married in October. He sends his regards, though he does not know who you are. I wanted you to know that Agnes spoke of you. She said you would be all right. She was usually right about people. With sincere thanks for what you did. P. You sit with this letter for a long time. Agnes. Agnes, who was the sanest person in the building. Agnes, who had been there 4 years when you arrived and 5 years when she died. Agnes, who told you to keep your voice pleasant. Agnes, who told you about the loose bar and said be better at it than I was. Agnes, who reached the wall. You think about what she must have felt reading the piece in the Chronicle from inside that room. The thing you wrote about her 4 years, her attempt, her sentence extended as punishment for trying. You had wondered if she would be angry to see it made public without her direct permission. You had taken a liberty using her story. She said you would be all right. You fold the letter. You put it in the box Charlotte gave you. The small wooden box where you keep the things that matter. The letter from Patience. Your father's last letter to you. The pressed flower from the garden at Mrs. Dempsey's that you tucked into your dress on your last garden walk. You hadn't known you were doing it, picking that small thing. Some instinct in your body said, take something green. Take something that grew without permission. A weed, actually, when you look at it now. The kind of thing that forces up between cobblestones. Persistent past any reasonable expectation. You put it in the box and close the lid. Eleanor Voss is released in 1765. You learn this years later from Cross, who has continued to write about the private madhouse system. Her brother comes for her eventually, moved perhaps by the same shift in public conversation that moved Patience's mother. The notes from Mrs. Dempsey's establishment, which are eventually obtained and examined, describe Eleanor at release as considerably improved in her symptoms and fit for domestic life. Whether she actually improved or whether she simply ran out of whatever was driving the convictions with the wall, the notes do not say. Whether improvement was the right word for what the establishment did to Eleanor Voss, whether quieter was an improvement or a defeat, nobody appears to have asked. The notes don't record Eleanor's own account of herself. Her own account of herself is not in those notes a document that exists. The seasons turn. Summer comes to London with its particular intensity, the smells rising with the heat, the Thames going low and dark and malodorous, the city pressing itself flat against the heat like an animal in the sun. The streets are full and hot and loud, and you walk through them every day just because you can. You work at the print shop. You write sometimes, not for publication, not yet, but for yourself. The letters you couldn't write at Mrs. Dempsey's, the thinking you couldn't do out loud, Charlotte reads some of. What you write and says in her direct way, this is good. You should consider more of it for print. Autumn comes, the light goes early, that November quality returning, and you feel it in your chest when October's last week arrives. A contraction, a bracing. The body's memory of what last October brought. You wake one morning with your heart going fast from a dream you can't quite recover, something cold and locked. But the window of your room has no bars. The door has no bolt, no 3-part lock song. You lie there for a moment, your hand flat on the blanket. Good blanket, wool, warm, slightly rough, but the right kind of rough. And you breathe, and you look at the ceiling, and you say to yourself, very quietly, I am here, I am not there, the window has no bars. Then you get up and go downstairs and help Charlotte with the morning press. Winter comes hard. The Thames doesn't freeze this year, though it comes close. the ice forming at the edges and reaching toward the centre before a warm spell breaks it. You stand on the embankment one morning and watch the ice and think about the frost fairs, the vendors, the music, the people sliding on their boots that you've heard about but never seen. The ice retreats, the river runs, spring, the first green in the window boxes on the street, the air doing what April air does, delivering something back that winter took. A year. You have been out for a year. That year has changed you in ways you're still mapping. You are, you think, sharper than you were. Not in the way of cynicism, not sharper in that particular direction that too much difficulty cuts, the direction that makes people narrow and defended, sharper in the way of attention. You attend to things more carefully than you used to. The quality of bread, the weight of a book in your hands, the sound of a lock opening and what follows from it. You're also, in some way you can't quite articulate, more deliberate. As if the time in the small room, the time of reduced everything, has given you an unusually clear picture of what actually matters, what, stripped back to bare materials, is the substance of a life. Food that has flavour, air that's outside, work that makes a thing, people who see you and say the true thing. Charlotte sees you and says the true thing. That's not a small thing. Thomas does not come. Twice. In the first year, his solicitor makes contact. The situation is regularised eventually through channels that cost Charlotte more in legal consultation fees than you have any right to let her spend, but that she insists on spending. Thomas remarries in 1766. There is a legal mechanism for this that Charlotte's solicitor navigates with a grimness that suggests the mechanism is imperfect but workable. You do not remarry. This is not a statement of anything particular. It is simply the fact of a woman of 28, 29, 30, who has good work and adequate income and a friend who tells the truth and a box containing a pressed weed and a letter signed only P, and who has decided, with the same calm with which she once told her husband she did not love him, that she is in no hurry. On quiet evenings, and there are quiet evenings, the world having quiet evenings regardless of what has filled the days around them, you sit in the back room of the print shop and read. The back room of a print shop smells of ink and paper, and the particular slightly oily smell of the press itself, the leather of the inking balls, the accumulated warmth of a room that has been in use all day. It is not a grand room. It is not a room anyone designed for comfort. But it has a fireplace and 2 chairs and a lamp that gives good light, and shelves along one wall that hold type cases and reams of paper and here and there books. Charlotte is usually at the desk when you sit there, working through the accounts or reading proofs, or writing the correspondence that running a print shop requires, letters to paper suppliers, to customers, to the writers who bring their pamphlets and essays and slim volumes of verse to be set and printed. You read. Sometimes you write. Sometimes you don't do either. You simply sit in the warmth with the fire going and the ink smell in the air and the sounds of the street outside doing their evening diminishment, the vendors going home, the carts reducing, the city settling toward its nighttime geography. You think about Sarah, you think about Agnes, you think about the 16 women, always 16 in your mind, though the number of course changes, is always changing, new women arriving through that gate while others leave or don't, and you think about what they're doing right now, on this quiet evening, in that room, the porridge going cold on the tray, the high window with the bars, the rough blanket that catches on your knuckles. I know what it is, you think. I know the specific physical texture of it. I know the exact sound of the bolt, and you know, with the certainty of someone who was there and is here now, that the knowing matters. Not because knowing changes the room. The room remains, the bolt remains, the bar on the window remains. But because knowing, and writing it, and printing it, and putting it in the world in black ink on white paper, is the thing that makes the knowing wider than one woman in one room. You pick up your pen. The fire in the print shop is going low. Charlotte has gone to bed. You heard her footstep on the stairs an hour ago, the familiar rhythm of it, and then the quiet of the upper rooms. You are alone. The lamp gives its small, steady light. Outside, London is doing its 2 a.m. work, the diminished traffic of a city that doesn't quite sleep, the occasional cart, the watchman somewhere calling the hour. 3 of the clock, he calls. 3 of the clock, and all's well. All's well. You set down your pen. You've been writing for 2 hours. The account, the longer one, the one that will eventually become the pamphlet that Cross helps you to distribute. The pamphlet that will end up in the hands of at least 2 members of Parliament, and eventually in the archives of a society for the reform of lunacy laws. You don't know any of that yet. Right now it is just words, just the account, the thing that happened told as clearly as you can tell it. You're tired, a good tired, the tired of having done work that mattered. You close the account and set it under the press weight and blow out the lamp. In the dark, the print shop is different. The shapes of the type cases, the bulk of the press, the window showing the street outside lit by the lamp of a passing watchman, his lantern swinging, casting the shadows of the window bars across the floor. Wait. You stop. Look again. Not bars. The window has no bars. That's the pane, divided by the wooden frame. 4 panes. Normal glass. Normal frame. The shadow is the frame's shadow, moving as the watchman's lantern moves. And then it is gone. You breathe. Right. Of course. You stand in the dark for a moment with your hand flat on the press, feeling the cold iron of it under your palm, massive, patient, permanent. A machine for making words real, for making the invisible visible. Then you go upstairs. The room at the top of Charlotte's house is small and cold at this hour. The fire hasn't been laid. But you've been cold before, and this cold is just cold, just temperature, nothing locked about it. You get into bed. The blanket is warm and slightly rough, the good rough of real wool, not the institutional rough of too many wrong washings, and you pull it up and you lie on your back and you look at the ceiling. The ceiling is dark and ordinary and has no meaning attached to it. That is its luxury. You think in the way you always think before sleep comes, in the slow dissolving way of thoughts losing their edges. You think about Margaret Ashworth, and Sarah, and Eleanor, and Agnes with her folded letters and her 5 years, and Patience who said I wanted you to know. You think about the loose bar and the cold water and the blunt needle and the linen you mended with neat, even seams as protest, as insistence. I was here. I was capable. I was real. You think about the wall and the broken glass and the cold ground on the other side of it, and Buttermilk Lane in the dark and a boy asleep on a bundle of torches, and Charlotte's ink-stained hands taking yours. You are warm enough. You are fed enough. You are safe enough. You have work that matters, and a window with no bars and a box with a pressed weed in it that grew without permission. That's more than Agnes had. That's more than Sarah had. That's more than most people in this city, in this world, in this hard and bright and relentless century have. That's enough. For tonight, it is enough. Let sleep come the way sleep came for Margaret, in her small room above the print shop with the ink smell in the air and the watchman calling outside and the press waiting in the room below like a held breath. Let your thoughts slow. Let the edges soften. Let the names and the dates and the cold rooms and the high windows become something less sharp, something more like weather, something that moves through and keeps moving. They were real. Margaret Ashworth was real. Or women like her were. Thousands of them. The ones whose names we have and the ones whose names we don't, who lay in cold rooms and mended linens and counted seconds and made of counting a form of resistance, who kept their voices pleasant and waited and planned and reached the wall and sometimes got over it and sometimes didn't. They were real, and they were capable, and they were right, and some of them wrote it down, and the writing survived, and you are here, in your warm room, in your warm bed, in your ordinary night, because that is what surviving looks like from the outside. Let it be enough. Centuries have passed since Margaret's window. The house on Hoxton Street is gone now, long gone, rebuilt into something else. The gate and the painted sign and the bars on the windows as invisible as most of the past is invisible. Underneath the present, layer on layer, unreachable except by digging. But the records survive. Not Margaret's, maybe. The records of private madhouses from the 1760s are fragmentary, partial, preserved by accident more than intention. But records like hers, the accounts written by women who got out, the pamphlets and the petitions and the letters to newspapers, the testimonies given to committees, the voices insisting, in the particular insisting tone of people who know they will not be easily believed. This happened. This was real. I was there. I know the exact sound of the bolt. The bolt is different now. The law is different now. The window is different now. But the human thing underneath, the thing that makes a person pick up a blunt needle and sew a neat seam as protest, that makes a person count seconds to prove their mind is still working, that makes a person climb a wall with wrapped hands and bleeding palms, that thing hasn't changed. The human heart doesn't change. The need to say, I am real, I am here, I am not what you filed me as. That doesn't change either. So let the darkness come now. Let the warmth of the blanket do its work. Let your breathing slow to the pace of someone who has, for tonight, done enough. You're warm, you're safe, you're here. And whatever room you're in right now, its walls, its window, its particular smell, its small sounds, it is yours, it is yours. That is not a small thing. The last thing you hear before sleep closes the distance, a clock somewhere in the dark. Counting seconds, each one real, each one passing. Good night.